Digital brothers, Korg's DW-8000 and DSS-1. Like most trends in the 80s, things move fast. The home computer revolution and rapid advancements in digital technology moved into the synthesizer world with a wave of sleek colored membrane panels. Yamaha's DX7 had changed everything, from fundamental design of what an oscillator could be to even the way a synthesizer looked with its sleek knobless front panel and menu-driven adjustments. Korg's engineers had just had reasonable success with the low-budget Poly 800 released in 1983, where they were able to craft a decent polysynth with their own custom ICs and standard components to keep things within the affordable range of a new generation of bedroom electronic music composers. During this time, the concept of what an oscillator could be was changing. With the DX7, Yamaha digitally created a wave cycle by recalling the digital form of one cycle of a sine or sawtooth waveform in raw memory. Wolfgang Palm of PPG, of course, had been working with wave cycles for some time now, with his successful but very expensive PPG Wave 2.2 and 2.3. The PPG Wave could use a variety of wavetables, which were a set of wave cycles to help recreate more complex tones, straight from the oscillator stage. This was exciting stuff, and of course departing from standard VCOs and diving into the digital world was exactly where Korg wanted to take their next line of synths. Being able to market and promote a new synthesizer that could reproduce tones that competed with the DX7 and offering even more capability was sure to be a success. After 2 years of development, in 1985, Korg released its DWGS, Digital Waveform Generator System synthesizers, the DW-8000 and DW-8000, to great excitement. At $1,295 US, the DW-8000 gave users a taste of cutting-edge technology often found on much more expensive synthesizers. The flagship DW-8000, with the ability to select between any of the 16 wave cycles that were printed on the front panel of the keyboard, gave it a very diverse and rich palette of sounds to work with. These 16 8KB samples were stored in one of the 4 128K ROM chips found on the main board. The DW-8000 also had some extra very helpful features, such as a digital delay which could also be used as a chorus to add to the richness of its sound. And along with its velocity and aftertouch sensitive keyboard, it was a very expressive instrument to play. The DW-8000 was unmistakably a digital synth, but the analog sound shaping stages used what was termed a 6-stage VGA envelope generator and a superb analog filter using Korg's combination 2069 VCA and filter IC. This filter can go into self-oscillation and sounds silky smooth. As an owner of a DW-8000, I find it to have a bold and tight sound that fits in well as a lead synth, brass, or pad, and has a sound that really is the 80s in so many ways. It sounds really pure, which is very characteristic of mid-80s synths, such as Roland's Alpha Juno or the Ensoniq ESQ1. For a brief time, right before the launch of Roland's massively successful and sonically groundbreaking D50, the DW-8000 was the new hot synth on the market. In parallel to the design team working on the DW-8000, Korg's engineers had another project of a much more ambitious nature in progress. What if there was one synthesizer that could not only sample and create its own wave cycles, but also use other methods such as additive synthesis, as well as hand-drawn waveforms to create these fundamental cycles? What Korg created was something that would take the engineering of the DW-8000 to all new creative levels and propel the company further into the digital age, setting the stage for its remarkable 1988 release of the M1. This powerhouse synthesizer was the DSS-1. The DSS-1 has to be the biggest 80s synthesizer I've ever seen, and is not only extremely heavy at 40 pounds, but broad in depth, measuring over 18 inches from front to back. At $2,600, this was not a cheap purchase for those getting into the world of sampling. In essence, it was Korg's attempt to do everything digital all inside one synthesizer. As a 12-bit sampler, it's functional but basic in nature. The the sampling memory maxes out at 256 kilobytes, and that gives approximately 5.5 seconds at 48K or 16 seconds at 16K in mono. This is similar in power to the low-budget Roland S10 that had just been released, and the very successful Ensoniq Mirage. As many as 16 multi-samples could be stored in memory, and with the standard 800K double-density disk drive, this stored enough to load up the sampler twice on one disk. Samples could be edited similar to most other samplers of the time, setting loop points, truncating, and key mapping. Because the DSS-1 OS is stored internally on ROM, the floppy drive isn't required to boot the instrument, which is a nice feature over other samplers of this era, such as the Roland S50 and Ensoniq Mirage. Inside the DSS-1 is an engineering marvel, with layered digital and analog boards driven by two different CPUs to do various tasks such as disk management and processing. The synthesizer side of the DSS-1 was extremely capable and fundamentally is set up as any subtractive synthesizer, with two oscillators which could be combined and run through its VCF and VCA sections, with LFO modulations at various stages. As mentioned, the voltage-controlled filter was the same sweet-sounding Korg 2069 as found on its brother, the DW-8000. Also, like the DW-8000, these two oscillators were digital, but instead of only 16 factory wave cycles, a user could select a created multi-sound to use as one of its oscillators. This gave the DSS-1 unlimited sound creation possibilities. Because wave cycles take up very little space on disk, on a single floppy, the DSS-1 could hold up to 4 systems each with 32 patches. The two oscillators work together in parallel. Typically, one oscillator could be set up to loop in a created wave cycle, and the second oscillator could play back a one-shot sample of the attack sound, such as a piano, to give a surprisingly realistic, sample-based recreation of an instrument. Next is where things got a lot different, as the architectural complexity of the DSS-1 took synthesis to a whole new level. Similar to the Kawai K3, the DSS-1 also provided the means to create a user-generated wave cycle using the non-real-time additive synth engine. Additive synthesis is a bit tricky to understand, but basically it's the concept of giving the user control of the amplitude of 128 different sine wave harmonic frequencies. These are all then added together to make a complex waveform. Now, understandably, this is almost impossible to do well without a visual interface. And similar to the K3, it was not real-time, so any changes to the additive parameters had to be processed first before they are heard. Not being able to hear what you are doing visually until an adjustment is processed makes it very difficult to program a wave cycle in this method, although with enough math and trial and error, some interesting results can be achieved. A third method of creating a wave cycle was to draw it by hand, using the data slider as a time count took place on a display. This actually works pretty well, and it's relatively easy to create simple waveforms, or just by moving the slider quickly up and down something quite a bit more complex. The DSS-1 had two separate LFOs, called modulation generators, that could be assigned to either the pitch or the filter, and also had oscillator sync for those killer leads, and a novel bit crush to take things down to 6 bits for a super gritty effect. The same delay board found in the DW-8000 was used in the DSS-1, but Korg engineers added a second board which could be routed in parallel or serial, which gave the unit some very creative abilities on the output stage. You can really hear these delays at work with the lushness of the DSS-1 output. In many ways, the DSS-1 was a success and a failure at the same time. As the sampler goes, within a year it was surpassed by other competitors such as EMU, Akai, and Roland, with up to 8 times the sample memory on a factory unit. Its OS was painstakingly slow at times due to the Intel 8085 CPU, And in 1988, Korg released the DSS-MSRK Memory and SCSI Retrofit Kit to add on a faster NEC CPU along with SCSI and 2 MB of memory and faster floppy DMA performance. However, the upgrade at $3,000 was more than the original list price of the DSS-1, so only a few hundred of these were sold and installed. Playing the DSS-1 is a dream, with its rich low bottom end, its smooth sounding filters, and the dual digital delays make this instrument one of the best sounding synthesizers I've ever heard. Korg's 1987 rack-mount version of the DSS-1, the DSM-1, out of the box had 1 MB of memory, a 1.6 MB floppy drive, and 16 analog outputs. But Korg eliminated the delay boards, the noise generator, and the oscillator sync, and reduced the filter capabilities to only 4-pole mode with no resonance. Although much more capable as a sampler, the DSM-1 was crippled as a synthesizer as compared to its keyboard brother. Korg's recent release of the Mod Wave incorporates the original 16 DW-8000 wave cycles and ideas inspired by the DSS-1 into its design. It's a great way to add this 80s sound to your music without the headache of owning a vintage instrument. Today, both the DW-8000 and DSS-1 are easy to find on the used market and for relatively cheap prices. The DSS-1 price remains relatively low, as it's such a massive synth, and not many musicians even have the space for it in their studio. The DW-8000 has ultimately suffered somewhat over the years from build quality, as most of the DW-8000s still surviving have issues with the softer plastic used to manufacture the case breaking down or become significantly marked. Despite these issues, these digital brothers were an important step in Korg's development of what would be its best-selling release to date in 1988, the legendary Korg M1. The DW-8000 and DSS-1 were truly landmark instruments that helped mold what would become the future of digital synthesizers as we know it today.